There are two main historical facts that scholars and most of historians all agree on upon the life of Jesus. Most will agree on the by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate, which leads to John Dominic Crossan's quote saying, Jesus' death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is as sure as anything historical can ever be. End quote. E.P. Sanders states that the crucifixion is one of the almost undisputable facts in conversations about Jesus' life. It is also widely attested that Jesus was buried in a tomb. Now, there is some doubt into some of this. You see some scholars doubt this idea. Think of the likes of like Bar Ehrman. But we have many sources confirming this idea. We have the Gospels, like let's say Mark, chapter 15, verse 42, all the way through chapter 16, verse 8. We also have Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 8. We even have Josephus in his Jewish war writings. Josephus did not mention Jesus specifically, but he's talking in this idea about crucified victims being buried. Jewish law demanded that criminals would be buried. We see this in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 23, and again with Josephus, who is a non-biblical writer, in his writing against Apion. The burial of Jesus is also something that is unlikely to be made up because of the embarrassing factor. If you tell a friend an embarrassing story, it's probably true, because who would lie and make themselves look silly or stupid? The text supports this because it reveals that the family of Jesus did not have enough money to pay for a tomb for Jesus, so Joseph of Arimathea would have had to jump in to help them. So considering most historians agree with these two facts I've stated, A, that Jesus died by crucifixion, and B, that Jesus was buried, then what follows is Jesus is still in his tomb. However, he is not. So what happened to Jesus? Where did his body go? Let's look at just a few popular theories about what happened to Jesus. One would be the conspiracy theory, which states that the disciples made up the story of Jesus and they stole his body. Two would be a hallucination theory, which simply claims that the disciples had a hallucination event, and then that's what made them believe that he had risen from the dead. And then lastly, we have the resurrection of Jesus. Let's start with the conspiracy theory. Could the disciples have stolen the body of Jesus and then claimed Jesus was alive? This is unlikely, but the conspiracy theory does answer why the tomb would be empty. However, more problems arise from this one basic fact. Why would the disciples invent a story that women got to the tomb first and they were the people to see the risen Jesus prior to anybody? Why would they show women as the brave and confident people and the men as weak and hiding in shame? Even worse, why would the disciples make up a story that was completely contradictory to Jewish thought of the time? Jews believed in one resurrection at the end of time for all people, not a resurrected Messiah in the middle of it. Yet even worse, who goes to their death believing a lie? As in, why would you create something, a lie, and die for it that you don't even believe? Well, you would have to say that they did it for some kind of political gain, some power or money or what have you. However, this is also contradictory to New Testament concepts and just early church fathers. We see nothing like this in any of these texts. We actually see the opposite. These people were poor and homeless and treated like complete crap. For these reasons, it's irrational to think that people just simply made it up and that they stole the body. We are also told that people like James and Paul were killed as martyrs in Josephus's accounts. This is also very strange because why would other people like very big skeptics, people that were persecuting the church like Saul, how would he come to believe in a risen Jesus if it was just a mere story that was made up? Well, what about the hallucination hypothesis? This one may be one of the strongest objections, but it still has a lot of problems. It is unlikely that the hallucination hypothesis supports any of the data. First, it does strongly, we do see in some literature that there is no way that a group of people could have a hallucinatory event. As in, if one person has a hallucinatory event, not everybody in this entire group will. We see this a lot. However, some skeptics will object here and say group hallucinations are unlikely, but what if one person hallucinated and then all of the other ones believed it? For example, imagine people that are trapped from some kind of shipwreck, and one person sees a ship coming over the horizon as they're in their lifeboat. And the one person hallucinates this saving boat to come and help them, but then all of the other ones then believe that. Well, this is problematic just because Jesus did not just appear one time, but over a period of time, as we see in Acts chapter 10, verse 34 through 43. Jesus appeared to all kinds of individuals, and over a very long span. There are also a lot of other books that actually do talk about hallucinatory events in group settings. There's a lot of people that write about this, and they think that it could happen possibly if there was either a expectation or some kind of emotional excitement, or people just being informed prior. When looking at this type of view that would warrant a group hallucination, the data does not match the historical data that we have for Jesus and his followers. There was no excitement, there was no expectation that Jesus would rise from the dead. The disciples are portrayed as fearful and run from the scene, as we see in Matthew chapter 26, verse 31 through 35, and Mark 15, verse 50. They even doubt the women's report, because the women were seen as lesser in these days. Luke 24:11 and John 20, verse 24 through 28. So as we see, the hallucination hypothesis does not make a whole lot of sense. But to end, we will say this. The biggest evidence against this would be Saul of Tarsus. Saul was a persecutor of the Christians, as mentioned in Galatians chapter 1, verse 23. Why would an enemy of Christianity hallucinate the risen Jesus? He had no expectation, he had no excitement, and he had no previous inquiry that would lead him to believe this. The best explanation is that Jesus really did see the risen Jesus, which explains his complete turnaround from being someone of the persecutor of the church, and then someone that was willing to die for it, as I mentioned earlier, with the account of Josephus. Now we can consider the resurrection hypothesis. When looking at the flaws of the others, we can see where this hypothesis answers a lot of the data, if not all. A hypothesis has explanatory scope, which means it explains all of the facts. It has explanatory power, which means it explains the facts with the least amount of effort. And it provides illumination, which historians describe as offering insight to other areas of history. Bihan Magula, in the book Justifying Historical Description, accepts that the resurrection explains these three and is a better explanation than the other ones that I've mentioned thus far. She says, and quote, "This hypothesis is of a greater explanatory scope and power than the others, which try to account for the relevant evidence, but is less plausible and more ad hoc than they are." However, I think the ad hoc objection is weak. A ad hoc is basically adding suppositions in order to explain the data, like supposing God exists. However, I would argue that it is not ad hoc to argue that God exists in this scenario, because most people, when arguing for Jesus' resurrection, argue for the existence of God too. So if you already provided the groundwork for the basis that God exists, then this is not ad hoc at all. So, we can simply look at all of this data thus far in a short complex and say the best explanation is that Jesus really did rise from the dead. Thank you guys for watching. Like and subscribe for more content like this, and let me know what you guys think down below.